Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Never Ending Conversation podcast. We're sitting here watching some nice waves lap on a YouTube video, so if you hear some sort of sounds in the background, that is what you're hearing. We're just trying to get something set up to have a little bit of ambiance in the background instead of the annoying motorcycles that you'll hear the odd time whipping by. But yes, so this is going to be part 2 of Science is Religion, and we want to talk today more about the corruption and issues that come up with the dogma of science. We, in our last podcast, had discussed some of the relations and trying to explain why we think that science is a religion, the big three being the community of the think tank, sort of the spreading of scientific knowledge. Second is the belief in an unseen force or unobservable force, which would be the two standing theories of quantum mechanics and general relativity. And then the third being the rituals that are often incorporated into the learning. When you go to university, there's always some sort of scientific a ritual or experiment that everybody participates in that's under that function of science. So if you didn't end up listening to the last podcast, we urge you to go back and take a listen to that, as we will be expanding on some of the ideas that Watson had brought up relating to the corruption that we observe in a lot of the scientific research fields.
Right. Like, for instance, I had heard that a lot of the research in climatology is geared towards scientists who want to research global warming and do research on that. But, I can't prove global warming is true, and at the end of the day, it's just a hypothesis that takes major proof. I don't think there's a smoking gun for it, but I'm not here to debate that that we're not damaging the earth,
because we definitely are outputting carbon like has not been seen in recent years.
Right.
We are a little bit of a disease when it comes to the creation of energy on this planet.
I think the point was just that it was one of preference, like favoritism, and that's not good for science.
Yeah, especially when it comes to where the government sort of puts their money. A lot of the Western governments are putting money into research that is trying to prove climate change, whereas the other hand is the big oil companies are putting in a lot of, or at least funding a lot of research that is trying to disprove or at least tamper down the amount of the impact that they're having on the global climate change movement.
And it's like they try to pass legislation based on it, but it hasn't been really definitively proven that I know of. And yet they, you just start to slowly see a corruption, a creeping agenda behind the, we want to save the earth. Well, is it that? Are you trying to save the earth, or are you trying to make a bunch of money and fool people into thinking that you're trying to save the earth?
Exactly. Especially in Canada, they brought out a carbon tax, so you have to pay an extra 10% on top of what you're already paying for your gas and other fossil fuel utilities, and so that goes right into the government, and God knows what they're going to do with it. They're probably just going to use it as another piggy bank.
And the thing is that the most successful manipulations of people, the most successful schemes, play off of people's better tendencies, to want to have a clean environment. That's a no-brainer, right? If you ask people, everyone's going to say, yeah, take care of the earth. We want clean water, fresh air,
exactly,
plenty of living space and everything, things that everybody want. But
exactly, so that's where we sort of see the dipole of where's the money coming from, and that's sort of what's funding these results. And there's a big example of the funding from the big tobacco companies.
The medical industry.
Even the medical industry, right? depending on who wants to fund it, especially with the tobacco, back in like the 50s, they were funding researchers, and if they weren't getting the results, that would not link the cigarette use to any sort of diseases such as cancer and lung issues. So that's what their goal was, is to get that sort of result that says, no, cigarettes are fine. And so if they didn't get what they wanted from the researchers, they would just keep the research and not publish it until they got a individual that published research that didn't link it. And then they would publish that as basically a consensus of all scientific bodies and their ideas around what the cigarette use and or other drugs would be, affecting the body. So it's sort of like that it's very corrupt, not even sort of corrupt. It's very corrupt, because they're really just, trying and fishing for the result that they want. If they get the wrong result, they keep it and don't publish it. And then once they get the result that they want, they publish that and then say, this is the consensus. So it goes both ways, whether you want to look at it as the climatology, right? If it's the big oil companies, they're funding research that's trying to say, no, we're not affecting the global temperature increase. It has to do with, maybe the equinoxes and how we're getting a little bit closer to the sun as these equinoxes are rotating, or something about the great year. They try to relate it to astronomical sort of occurrences and events. So there's many different factors going on as to why we're actually warming, but I think that there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There is significant human activity increase that is leading to some of the issues that we're observing.
What I'm kind of seeing from this is that science isn't much different from religion after all, because again, the materialistic empiricists, the rationalists, love to point to the Spanish Inquisition and the Salem witch trials and things like this, the Crusades, and can they not see the hypocrisy of pointing out the corruption in the church when there's corruption to be found in their own backyard?
Exactly, and one argument that you could bring up with science is, well, science is a progress. They didn't have the information at that point, and it's constantly trying to update itself, right? And that is true. That's one of the nice things about the religion of science, is that it's really rooted in trying to update its model as often as it can, as soon as you bring in new tangible evidence and ideas.
Right.
But this leads into our second point of the corruption, and that being that a lot of new ideas, whether it be through history or actual scientific models, they have issues bringing up these new ideas, and people reject them.
There's science and the scientific method, and then I think I'm seeing that the religion of science, to me, it's the beliefs that go along with what is generally assumed as a conclusion, or as conclusions from what science is telling us about nature and the universe in general. But where it goes awry, where we can make a mistake, is in assuming that science has a monopoly on God not existing. That, to me, then, is part of the quote-unquote religion of science, garden variety, right? Like, the general religion of, or inclination of scientifically minded academic types, researchers and academics, is to go with this view that God doesn't exist because it comes from a surface analysis of the data. I believe, they're just not looking at it right. Like, you didn't see the prior mind dilemma,
or they already have
there's
target set. They already know what they're looking for, and that's all they see, right?
ahead of it. They put the cart before the horse.
Yeah, but not, they know what
And that's
results
the big
that they
no-no
want. So
in science. So, yeah.
yeah, and so when we're talking about science, I'd like to just make this one clear point that we're not specifically just talking about the scientific disciplines of like chemistry, biology, mathematics, and physics. We'd also like to sort of incorporate some of the lesser, I guess, tangible ones, such as even the acquiring of our knowledge as a human species and where our past was and how our history sort of molded our civilizations. Mm-hmm. And so one of the examples I want to bring up is with Graham Hancock. Yeah, he's a very smart guy, and I love listening or reading his books. Just anything that he puts out, he's got a very interesting perspective on how our civilization sprouted out.
I like his thing, species with amnesia.
Exactly, and that's what I think we are. I don't believe that this is our first go around at being a fully globalized intelligent species. And so he proposes that the flood myths that are preeminent throughout most ancient civilizations and a lot of myths that lead into other religions, that is actually a true fact, is what he's proposing, and that is what wiped out the previous civilization that was on Earth. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that the people that were left over are what developed into what we see now as all the different types of races around the world, and into these different sort of cultures. And so a lot of the mainstream historians, they just sort of put this off as a fantasy. They will not accept it, because the pyramids were built, back 4,000 or whatever years ago, and the Sphinx was made like 3,500 years ago. Not exactly sure on the real numbers there, but whereas he proposes that like the Sphinx is an astronomical alignment with the constellation of Leo, because it is a lion, and that constellation was aligned with the head of the Sphinx 12,000 years ago, which coincides with the Great Flood myths and when they would have happened, because they see a lot of water erosion across the world that dates back geologically to this time. And so he's not really getting as much accreditation for it.
So it's kind of like a religious belief, but it's just...
And they call it pseudoscience, right, is what they try to push it off as it's not real science, it's just pseudoscience, right? And he even claims he's not a scientist, he's just a reporter that had a fascination with trying to uncover the story, and this is the story that he sort of attached to and is trying to uncover. But he's not getting any sort of positive feedback from the general establishment. Exactly.
Because it goes against the grain. When things, even when there is evidence, and I think that there is evidence for a lost high civilization with all the megalithic structures around the world, and evidence for trade with America thousands of years ago, and they find tobacco and cocaine and mummies and that shouldn't be there.
Exactly.
They were traveling around the world before the New World was allegedly discovered.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of missing lines of history.
And Michael Cremo wrote a book called Forbidden Archaeology that has all kinds of tidbits of where something anomalous was discovered. He wrote a whole thick book on it.
And that's it. There's tons of weird archaeological artifacts that they find, right?
And those sorts of things, like even when there's proof, even when there's evidence, like when it rocks the boat so much, and it even rocks not only the scientific boat, it rocks the religious establishment too, because it's not in the Bible. And that gets under the problem of Christianity and other religions just being too structured and too rigid. Christianity can suffer from it, science can suffer from it as well.
Exactly. So rigid. Even though science is a very moldable sort of religion, right? They do change.
It makes
frequently.
it so that whenever evidence does come, it's not like in a position where it can like properly accept it and integrate it and figure out what to do with it.
And it's a good thing that they sort of take the skeptical point of view, right? Like they want to make sure if they're incorporating it into the scientific mind.
It's entirely possible that we can have Copernicuses in this day and age, like that we can have Keplers and whoever was like locked up on house arrest or whatever. It was one of the astronomers. They put him on house arrest for like trying to prove that the Earth was not the center of the universe. It would have been Kepler or Galileo. Yeah, it was Galileo.
It
The
just
point with that was that can still happen today. It's because of rigidity in the power structure. Another example of science as a religion is how you have to go back to the Big Bang and how science, the Big Bang cosmology assumes that time and space all started and originated with the Big Bang. They don't even try to go back before that in most cases. But Terence McKenna always used to say that science says, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. Give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. The one free miracle is the emergence of all the matter and energy in the universe in a single instant from nothing. From nothing. So it all starts with what could be characterized at least as a very religious and pseudo-scientific, like not very well-founded basis of, we're just going to assume that this whole entire system created itself from nothing for no reason, and it did it at some arbitrary moment that we don't understand, like what happened there, but then after that, then we can go from there, and then from there we can evolve into snooty people walking around making fun of Christians like there's no reason to believe in God, but you can never possibly get rid of the belief in God because it doesn't originate from religion. That's where we talked about that in the first podcast, how it's primal and part of human nature and will be manifested in the distant future.
Exactly, because I still feel like no matter, even if you get rid of most of the mainstream religions and people that are believing in God, you're never going to be able to completely stamp out the God experience. People will still have it, right? Whether it's through psychedelics or if it's through intense meditation.
And science can marry religion by studying the ecstatic, spiritual experience, the experience of the divine that can be experienced through.
So going back to sort of like the corruption that we're talking about, right, is that like when you look at science, yes, it does try to be malleable and change as new ideas come out, but they're very resistant to this change as well. They don't like to really bring in outsiders. If you didn't go through the regimental rituals of becoming a scientist and doing your postdoctoral theses and work within a certain type of field, and then you try to branch into a different field of study, they don't take you seriously. So with that, it's a very limiting factor because, having someone with outside eyes looking at another aspect of the scientific realm, that's when you really do get these new ideas that come out. But the scientific think tank, they seem to be very resistant to having these outside ideas come through. And going back a little bit to the
consciousness studies, for one thing,
which are probably aren't
because if
very
they study
funded,
consciousness and can figure out that the soul exists, I don't think they would even tell people. It would be something that they'd want to keep secret. Because they either couldn't, if they couldn't figure out how to sell it through Bayer, what are they going to do with it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the last part that we sort of want to talk about is that really the funding that we were talking about earlier, it only goes towards things that the government will find useful, right? They're not going to fund.
That's why
a lot of
grassroots
research.
funding is so important.
exactly.
Right? And grassroots research, like people holding science accountable for its own claims. Not in like the really details of the science, perhaps, but just, like the areas and the directions that science is going in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like going back to like the funding, right? Mm-hmm. So let's look at one of the very well-known individuals that has been sort of, crucified within major sort of scientific knowledge, Nikola Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely is one of the greatest inventors of, the electronic age, right? He basically invented majority of the stuff that we use nowadays.
Yes.
And he doesn't really get much credit for it. And any of the out there ideas that he might have had, if they resulted in something that the government or big industries wouldn't really be able to monetize, then they lock it down. They don't allow it out.
He wanted free energy for everybody, so they killed him. No, they didn't kill him, but
he died of a ripe old age of like 95 or something like that.
Right. They came in and
maybe 75.
Confiscated his papers.
Yeah, as soon as he died, they grabbed everything that he had written down, invented.
Didn't go to his family or anything.
No one's ever seen it again. All right, probably locked in some sort of secret base
where they reverse engineer alien technology.
Yeah, exactly. So there's your little dose of conspiracy theories
and work on back engineering Tesla papers.
Exactly. So, yeah, sort of what we're trying to get at is that even though science really is providing great answers to a lot of everyday questions, they're providing phenomenal feats of technological innovation, it's still, fallible. It's got problems in its own structure system as well, because, there's resistance to change. It's sort of the nature of human to try to resist change, even though life brings change at every corner.
Yeah, and to go with the best explanation, because, like, in some sense, like, since God wasn't, like, obviously there, the scientific approach is like, oh, well, doesn't exist until proven otherwise.
Exactly.
And that just kind of goes a bit far.
Yeah, so sort of the aim of this segment of the part 2 is what we're trying to get at is that, we're going to try and tackle as much of the spirituality theories as we can through a scientific mindset. We're both very rooted in that sort of mindset of
love science, and we're not
scientific method.
Right.
We just want to allow the opening of your mind to the idea that even though science has been very well proven and is shown that a lot of what they've been talking about is true, they also are still very far away from really obtaining a definite answer as to what is reality.
And how it's susceptible to the same systemic problems that religion is susceptible to.
Exactly. So we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for listening, and please make sure you hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I would also like to have you maybe go check out Novelty Engine.
Thank you.
Watson's also creating a podcast that him and I are collaborating on over on his channel. This one we talk a little bit more in depth into mathematical principles, and so I'll let him maybe just give you a quick little overview of that.
My channel is kind of science and math, general science applied to the divine. What can we learn about, if anything, excuse me, and what can we learn about God? Can we prove that God could exist logically? Are there clues left in nature that God exists? Things of that nature.
Yeah, so if you're looking for something else to listen to.
The paranormal, the paranormal and psychedelics as well.
So yeah, if you want to listen to us ramble on a little bit more, make sure you head
Please.
on over to Novelty Engine
Head on over there.
and take a listen to what we've got to say there too. And so with that, we will sign off. So thank you very much for listening to our podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.